Right, good morning. And instead of talking about the Philippines today in terms of its relationship with China, today we're going to move a little bit further to the north. We're going to look at China and Japan because everyone's been talking about the Japanese Prime Minister back in November making so-called provocative comments regarding Taiwan. And so one of the things that we have to do with the Chinese is, of course, it's like playing whack-a-mole because the Chinese have so many crazy, outlandish claims regarding all of their territorial disputes, but probably more so with the territories that were de jure part of Japan as World War II began. Those are, of course, Taiwan, Senkaku or Diaoyu, and the Ryukyu Islands. So now, the Chinese have this claim that following World War II, Japan was actually limited to just the four main islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Shikoku, and Kyushu. So if you look at the document that they cite, and the document that they cite is called the Potsdam Proclamation, okay, in which it states, quote, Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and sorry, Shikoku. There is no and there, and there's a reason there's no and there. Okay, it just says it's limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and then that's where they end it. Except that's not quite where it ends. So let's take a look. So with those three territories, what the Chinese often claim is that one, Taiwan was transferred to Chinese sovereignty following World War II. Two, that the Senkaku Islands or the Diaoyu Islands were legally returned to China following World War II, and that when the United States returned those islands to Japan in the early 1970s, it was violating the spirit of both Cairo and Potsdam, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And three, that the Ryukyu Islands, also returned to Japan by the United States in 1972, was illegally returned. And not only that, there's even a more recent claim by the Chinese, which I will address in another video later, that the Japanese annexation of Ryukyu in 1878, some sources say 1879, doesn't matter, was in fact illegal in the first place. As crazy as that claim sounds, that is a claim that they are increasingly making. So let's take a look at the four islands argument for today, and we'll shelve some of those others for another day. And so this claim is actually hogwash. So there's actually two documents that are often cited by the Chinese when it comes to these territorial disputes. One is called the Cairo Declaration, which was a statement of intent issued in 1943 by President Roosevelt of the United States, Prime Minister Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Generalissimo Jiang of the Republic of China. It was an unsigned document, which is basically regarded as a declaration of intent and no more. But what does it say? In regards to the islands in question, there are two clauses that are worthy of note. One, quote, Japan would be stripped of the islands in the Pacific seized since 1914. Well, this clause actually does not relate at all to Taiwan, Senkaku, or Ryukyu because all of those islands were taken before 1914. Taiwan was taken by treaty in 1895. Senkaku or Diaoyu was also taken in 1895, though not related to the treaty, and Ryukyu was taken in 1878, 1879. So that clause does not relate. The second one, however, is worthy of a little bit closer inspection. The second one says, quote, territories taken from China, including Manchuria, Formosa, and the Pescadores, would be restored to the ROC. Now, it is worth taking a closer look at that clause because when we talk about Manchuria and when we talk about Taiwan, I'm going to talk about Taiwan. I'm going to also include the Pescadores, also called Penghu, because it is actually regarded integrally as a part of Taiwan. So, Manchuria was never legally Japanese. The Japanese occupied it as it was part of the Republic of China in the early 1930s. There is no treaty that confirmed Japanese ownership over the region, and so the Japanese never had legal sovereignty over it. Taiwan is a different story. Taiwan and the Pescadores, yeah, or today called Penghu, because there was in fact a treaty that explicitly stated that those islands were Japanese sovereignty. Two, Taiwan was never part of the Republic of China to begin with, unlike Manchuria. So yes, it would be proper to say that Manchuria would be returned to the Republic of China, but that's actually not a true statement in regards to Taiwan, because Taiwan was never part of the Republic of China in the first place, because when the Republic of China was founded in 1912, Taiwan was part of Japan, and Taiwan was under Japanese rule. It is also worthy of note, as I mentioned earlier, this is an unsigned document. It is little more than a statement of intent, which has basically zero legal authority under international law. It certainly is not a treaty. It certainly is not a ratified treaty, which is what is necessary to transfer sovereignty of a territory from one state to another. The second document is called the Potsdam Proclamation. Similar to Cairo, it is not a signed document. It is a declaration of intent, and it is not signed or ratified. But let's take a look at what it says. This is where the Chinese claim is at best a half-truth, because it states, quote, Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku. Now, when the Chinese cite this clause, that's usually where they stop. However, that's not where it ends, because there is, in fact, an and there, but it doesn't come between Kyushu and Shikoku. It actually comes after Shikoku. So after it says Shikoku, it says, quote, and such minor islands as we determine. The Chinese love to ignore that clause because that clause completely blows their claim out of the water that Japanese sovereignty was legally restricted to the four home islands, which is what is commonly referred to, the four islands of Honshu, Kyushu, Shikoku, and Hokkaido, the home islands. That Japanese sovereignty was limited to the home islands following World War II. That is utter hogwash. Under international law, to transfer territory, to transfer sovereignty of territory from one state to another state, it requires a ratified treaty. This is a constant in the Westphalian state system. It actually existed before the creation of the Westphalian state system in 1648, okay? A system that pretty much the entire world abides by today. China most certainly did by this point in time. So, under international law, the Chinese claims have absolutely no standing whatsoever. Now, it is a fair point that the Japanese did accept these terms when it signed the instrument of surrender in September of 1945. But keep in mind, the Allied representative in that instrument of surrender was a general, not a politician. And the Japanese also signed it. But again, this is not a ratified document. All in the room understood that territorial issues would not actually be addressed until the peace treaty would be signed and ratified, which didn't happen until several years later. Furthermore, when the ROC accepted Japan's surrender in Manchuria, Taiwan, it did so under the explicit direction of the American General Douglas MacArthur in General Order Number 1. So when the Republic of China accepted Japan's surrender, it wasn't accepting it on behalf of the ROC, it was accepting it on behalf of the Allied powers. No treaty had been signed yet. Potsdam does not limit Japan to the four home islands, as the Chinese often claim. And as usual, the Chinese, once again, are telling half truths to try to convince people that what they're saying is correct. But again, like many other half truths, this is actually worse and more deceptive than an outright lie.